Pacifist designer based in Halifax, and I'm also a Pacifist instructor with Pacifist Canada, and owner of a residential design business in Halifax. So before we begin, I'm going to hand things over to our CEO of Pacifist Canada, Chris Ballard. Goodness, I'm tongue-tied, to say a few words.
Great, thanks, Laurie, and thanks for hosting a second Atlantic Canada Halifax Pulse event. It's really nice to see the amount of interest on the East Coast because, you know, historically we're a West Coast organization, and we're busy building a truly national organization. So I'm Chris Ballard. I'm the CEO of Pacifist Canada. I live in a small community in Ontario. Laurie was talking about fog. We've got snow where I am, but you know, it's still winter. What can I say? Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. I'm so impressed by the interest shown, the growth in interest shown by people right across the country with regards to high performance, net zero, passive house design, and we're here to help you network and to answer some questions and just to have an enjoyable evening. So our guest tonight is Kelly Fisher. Kelly's a certified passive house consultant at Peel Passive House Consulting, and of course our host is Laurie Rand, a certified passive house designer and instructor for Passive House Canada and the proprietor of her own design company in Halifax. So thank you to Kelly, and thank you to Laurie. And I will say, I don't know if you remember this, Kelly, but you and I have a long history going back at least 2 years, because I think it was my second day as CEO of Passive House that I attended an event, and it might have been a Fenestration Canada event, where you were given an award for your achievements in the world of passive house design. So that's how far we go back. Somewhere I've got a picture of that event. So great to see you here. Back to you, Laurie, and thanks for the invitation. Before I go, though, I want to recognize SIGA and Sean McStay, the Vice President of Sales and Operation, for graciously sponsoring tonight's event, as they are with our Pulse events across Canada. It's really fantastic to have a partnership with a great company like SIGA with all their good products, and they help Passive House practitioners and Passive House Canada in a whole host of ways. So I will say thank you again, and I'll pass the evening back to Laurie, and I get to go into monitoring mode now and learn as much as I can from the presentation. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris, for the great introduction. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that Passive House Canada acknowledges the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people that call this land home. I'm going to give you just a bit of an overview of our event schedule. So we'll be asking our sponsor, SIGA, to say a few words shortly, and then we'll start things off with an open discussion for about 20 minutes, where we'll talk about projects that everyone is working on, and also we'd love to know what you would like to get out of this session. Kelly has some pretty amazing expertise, so we want to make sure to ask everything we want to know. And then afterwards, we'll welcome Kelly to give her presentation talking about optimizing energy efficiency in multifamily residential buildings. And then we'll we've allowed lots of time for some questions and answers for Kelly, and also general suggestions for topics for upcoming events. So I have to tell you guys, I'm so excited that we have so many people signed up for tonight. The first Pacifist Pulse last month, we had a great participation, and I was worried that it was going to be a one-off. So thank you for showing up again. I think we're going to do some great things here. Now, before I hand it over to Sean, I do want to let you all know that Pacifist Canada will be holding their annual conference in May, the May 25th through 27th in Victoria, BC. And that's a hybrid conference, so we'll have the option to join online as well. The theme for the annual conference this year is In the Face of Climate Change. And our goal is to bring together like-minded individuals to incite conversations about how we can work together to create sustainable, future-focused buildings and communities. And we are looking for speakers who are passionate and knowledgeable about Pacifist design and technology amidst climate change. And there's just a couple of days left to put in your submissions if you're interested in being a speaker. So Friday at 1 p.m. Atlantic time is the deadline. And I think we can put a link to that in the chat. And if anybody wants to ask questions, I'm also available. So on that note, without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Sean at SIGA. So I would like to thank you, Sean, as our sponsor for this event. SIGA is a manufacturer, developer, and distributor of air and wind type products for building construction. They strive for a world of zero energy loss buildings. So over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Lori. Happy to see so many people here again. Happy to see so many people at all of these events all across Canada. Pacifist Canada is doing a fantastic job of spreading the word and getting everybody involved and sharing knowledge. I'm super excited myself to hear Kelly speak. It's always interesting. I always learn something, and she's got great experience on some fantastic projects. As always, if anyone has questions about SIGA or questions about any other Pacifist products, happy to help out where I can. I'll put my contact info in the chat. And with that, we'll pass it back to Lori.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So first on our agenda for the evening is just about 20 minutes of checking in. So last time we had lots of volunteers to come out and introduce themselves and give us a little snapshot of what you're working on and what you're interested in learning. So hopefully we can carry on like that. I'd love to hear from those of you who are new and those of you who joined us last week, or last month rather.
Well, I'll dive right in here. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Dory from East Cut Wood Building Solutions. We're located in Trenton, Nova Scotia. We are a panelized manufacturer. We've currently been working on a passive design project for Adsom House in Halifax. It's a project that is associated with a nonprofit for housing insecurities and homelessness. That project has been all panelized and has been being assembled as we speak. And we have another project that's coming into our pipeline in the next few weeks, which is also passive design. So we're really interested in learning even how to take passive initiatives into even bigger projects, as in larger multi-res projects. So we look forward to participating in this and gaining more knowledge and play a major role in Passive House, Nova Scotia.
Thanks, Ben. And I have definitely written your name down beside my list of possible presenters for future events. So
nice.
Once you guys, get that Adsom House building up and have some really cool pictures, we'd love to have you show us.
Look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Cool. Anybody else want to share? Oh, perfect.
Hey, Laurie. This is Valentine with Gomex Engineering, the recently certified Passive House designer out of Prince Edward Island. Not currently working on any Passive House projects, but I'm doing some reviews on someone called me and asked if they'd already had all of their designs done and solidified, and they said, "Can you make this passive now?" So I said, that we're a little bit past that, unless you want to go back to the drawing board. But I'll have a look at it and see if there's little comments that I can make for a review. So just slowly putting away at that right now.
Yeah, I feel like that should be like an auto-responder message, because we get that one a fair bit too.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pierre Gionnet. I just completed my exam for a consultant as a Passive House, and right now I'm working on designing my house, and hopefully I can start the construction this year.
I know that there are some people in the group who are considering writing the exam in the future. So how did you find it? How did you, what was your experience like?
Well, you need to practice to do the design. So I ran out of time, but it's practice for the design, I would say. The rest, if you do pretty much all the example that they provide us during the training, you should be pretty good to do all the questions. But it's time management, really, really important. And yeah, don't waste time with the design. It's just practice. I mean, I know all that stuff, but I'm not sure if I passed, but hopefully I did. But yeah, just to put all your thoughts in the paper as quick as possible.
Well, congratulations on doing that.
Thanks.
Hi there, Laurie. I'm happy to go next. It's Linda.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Munden. I'm from Efficiency, Nova Scotia. I'm the manager for the Preferred Partner Network, which is a network of apprenticeship trades, professionals, solar installers, and builders. So we've been working collaboratively with Passive House Canada. We've got the in-person trades coming up in March. I do believe it's the 15th to the 17th, right, Laurie?
Let me just double check. I think
I think it is. So we've sponsored,
like
yeah, so we've helped to sponsor that for the Preferred Partner Network. What's going on at Efficiency right now? All kinds, especially within the network itself, that's for sure. Program enhancements are happening all the time. There's constant changes, and if you're interested in finding out more about the programs at Efficiency, feel free to reach out to me after this. I'm more than happy to connect you with the right people as well. Passive House and net zero design is definitely something that we would support, and there would be incentives towards those types of builds as well. Yeah, so I'm really interested to hear all the different projects everyone has, and if you have any questions about the network or need any further support for upskilling yourself, feel free to reach out.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to make sure I remembered to talk about the conference, and I forgot about actually talking about next month. So it's March 17th through 19th. We have in-person contractor tradesperson training here in Halifax, and we definitely still have spots available. So let your contractor friends know if you're a contractor and you want training. I just put the dates in the chat because I didn't have the link pulled up, but I have all the details.
I can put the link in the chat as well for any folks Linda. That might be on the call. If they are part of the Preferred Partner Network, there is an extended discount as well. But if you're also looking forward to joining or finding out a little bit more, that's also an option as well. So I'll pop that in the chat, Laurie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
So anyone else want to introduce themselves? And I definitely would love to know what what you're hoping to get out of today's session in terms of information from Kelly. Sometimes if I'm quiet long enough, somebody jumps out. But if nobody wants to continue or to continue the networking part, we can definitely just jump in with Kelly's presentation. And I know that there's going to be lots of questions afterwards, so we can have our chit chat then. So joining us this evening is our special guest, Kelly Fisher. Kelly's a certified Pacifist consultant and comes from a background in construction and architectural design. And Kelly is a certified Passive House consultant since 2018, and she's also a PHPP expert since 2019. So that's quite an achievement. You may not know what that means, but it's I'm pretty impressed. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Kelly.
Great, thanks, Laurie. And for those of you who don't know, the PHPP expert is just an add-on seal you can get to your CPHC designation from PHI. I was one of the first people that's at the course ages ago, so it's in my mind, now that I've had it for a little while, nothing really special, but it's always a bit of a nice little add-on gambit to your existing CPHC. So let me just get my screen up here. So I'm assuming you guys can all see that now. I've lost cameras, they've gone somewhere. Okay,
yeah, you're good.
Yeah, Zoom always has everything on top until you need it and then it's gone. So just let me minimize a bunch of stuff here. I like to see faces when I'm talking. So okay. All right, so today, I'm going to talk a little bit about design optimization with multi-residential passive house projects. So there's a few items that we can look at when we're looking at designing passive house projects that'll help us from an energy standpoint. And so it's not necessarily like your wall envelope, like your envelope or your windows. It's a bit more than that. Once you get into, you make the step from single family homes into larger buildings, it becomes a bit more of a game of energy consumption and not so much to do with your envelope and your windows. That stuff is a lot easier to contend with. So I'm going to go through a few different topics that we usually look at a bit more in depth when we're doing our passive house consulting on multifamily projects. So today I'm going to touch a little bit on a few of the main aspects that we look at a bit more in depth for our consulting on multifamily projects. So the first is domestic hot water distribution, and then we'll touch a little bit on ventilation strategies and a little bit on electricity and maybe some aspects of a project that you might not think from a single family home perspective make much of an impact, but when you get into larger buildings, there are things that we really look at. And then we'll get into some Q&A. That's always the best part. So diving right in, one of the strategies that we always look at for domestic hot water is distribution. So how efficient is your distribution system? If you've got a 10-story building and it's all residential, how many risers have you got? Well, where are they located? And is there an option to have fewer of these in your building? Is there an option to maybe look at different circulation routes or distribution routes? So here's just a snip of a floor plan from a project that I worked on at one point, and everything that's in a red box is a shaft for a riser. And this could be hot water, this could be sanitary. So it's kind of spread out around this project. And it was, despite the fact that we had back-to-back washrooms and generally like the kitchens were back-to-back as well, we still ended up with a fair bit of vertical risers. there are a lot more things that we can do when it comes to efficiency. So we often talk about efficiency in design. And here's a view of just a quick SketchUp model that I made that kind of shows how we can further improve this. So here's an example where we've got suites back to back. So we've got kitchen on each side, a washroom on each side. We've got our showers and our lavatories. And then in the center, we've got a shaft. And in this mechanical shaft, we can do our main distribution. We can do our distribution for ventilation and our distribution for our domestic hot water. And when we look at how that could look floor to floor, we can really kind of optimize our distribution network. We can have far fewer pipes. And when you're looking at ways to save energy, in a passive house, we all know that your space heating demand gets a lot lower in a passive house. And then the next energy sink that we find is domestic hot water. You've got a lot of pipe heat losses through your pipes, through your distribution system, a whole variety of different things that we can look at for efficiencies. And one of the ways that we can do this is clustering the systems together to limit the amount of risers we've got in our design. So in this example, we saw the floor plan here where it's back-to-back suites, but we also can stack them vertically as well. And what this allows us to do is simplify our approach and have one hot water riser, for example, that services in this situation 8 suites. And that would be a lot more efficient system. We could save on our heat losses. We could save on our watts per suite if you wanted to factor that in for your domestic hot water load. So there's a lot of things that you can do early on in the design of a project that really kind of help amplify those efficiencies later on in design if you're tight. Like oftentimes we find as the project progresses, your available energy you've got for certification or even your space heating demand, if that's something that you're looking at with design, those targets, you get less and less buffer as you go through design. So trying to look at it foundationally and fundamentally from the start is really incumbent on the designer to see if there's any ways that you can kind of cluster things together, group things together, limit your pipe lengths, and do some analysis in the P2P to determine, which works better from an energy standpoint, and also maybe even, definitely even, coordination and collaboration with your mechanical engineer. So this is a really keen way that something that we do. We try and make sure that we've got a more efficient domestic hot water distribution. Second to that, when we're talking about domestic hot water, is the quality of your pipe supports. So we all know the setting, most of you should know the setting. If you've got some passive house experience, especially dealing with the PHPP and the passive house planning package. Sorry, I've been on the phone all day. My words are a bit hard. So one setting that can be a bit of a sink when you're looking from an energy standpoint is the quality of your mountings. This is a really easy detail to include in your set, in your drawing pack, and making sure that you've got that good, that we don't want none or moderate, we want good. And this is a really easy detail that's often overlooked. Some projects, it may not follow through, or the trades on site may not realize that it's a requirement. So following through and making sure that you've got good connections on your mountings and your suspensions to ensure that you're not incurring additional heat losses or thermal breaches through the system. So this is a really easy detail that's often overlooked. The last, well, not really the last, but one of the more important things that I learned a lot about when I joined Field Passive House was the concept of time to tap. If you turn on your hot water in your bathroom or your kitchen, how long does it take you to get water to come out of your faucet? And if that answer is a lot, like a minute or 2 minutes, you're going to be wasting water until you get hot water. So this is an assessment that we do to say, okay, what optimization can we put in our design? Where are we looking for our connection points within our suites? How does that impact how much water or how much time it takes for that hot water to get to the furthest faucet? We even look so far as to say, what are the flow rates of these fixtures so that we can further optimize this consumption. If somebody has to turn a shower on or a tub on and let it warm up, then we all know they're going to walk away and they're going to forget about it. And that's a huge concern, both from a water conservation standpoint, but also from an energy standpoint. We're just literally throwing heat down the drain in this scenario. So this is a concept that is really, really great in my mind, and something that should be included in a lot of these projects, just so that we can limit our consumption and decrease our energy consumption as well with respect to heating the hot water. there's a lot of great information available for this. We worked with a gentleman out of California, Gary Klein was his name, and he really helped us better understand the process and the math behind it to further improve our designs. Generally, for domestic hot water, these three items are really keen concepts that can really help reduce your consumption and improve your optimization and your efficiencies with your design. So now I'm going to move into ventilation. I'm just touching quickly on some of these things as we go through, just to make sure that generally the concept is out there. We can get into some discussion as I kind of finish out the presentation. But with ventilation, when we get into these multifamily buildings, we're moving into the larger of the two ventilation worksheets in the PHPP. We move into the additional ventilation worksheet with multifamily buildings, as opposed to just the ventilation worksheet. And what this kind of requires is a much more thorough input on how we're ventilating each room. And oftentimes there is some disparity and differences between what we as passive house designers think the ventilation requirements need to be and what your mechanical engineer thinks these ventilation requirements need to be. So getting this sorted out as early in the process as you can for your design and for your building will really kind of help you nail down efficiencies and what your high-end load calculations are going to be, or what your space heating targets should be kind of rounded out to. So this is a very, very important thing for any passive house consultant that's working on a large family or multifamily building, to kind of go through and make sure you've got this coordination with the ventilation flow rates. It's a huge part of the energy calculations. And touching on that a little bit, when we get into large buildings, maybe not as large as this one, but we're moving away from individual ERVs. So when you get into single family homes, you've got much smaller systems, much smaller units. And oftentimes we see that similar approach when we get into these large multifamily homes, where every single suite would have its own dedicated ERV. But another alternative to that is centralized or semi-centralized ERVs or HRVs. And these are systems that, you've got ductwork throughout your whole building, you're supplying fresh air everywhere, from 1 to maybe even 6 units, depending on how big your building is. There's a lot more efficiencies with this option, with respect to the integrity of your air barrier, and even some design options that you would have available for you as well. You could even maybe look at supplier heating or supplier cooling for your buildings to save further use of equipment within the suites and reducing your maintenance. So there's a lot of different avenues and areas that you could look at for optimization and efficiencies, both from an energy standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint. When we're looking at passive houses for multifamily buildings, cost is always a driver. So trying to do your value engineering as you're designing and being aware of what you're proposing or what your design is going to include is really important to help the client and the homeowner or whoever's going to be running the building to better survive those upfront costs and that capital cost to get it through. So just doing your due diligence and being aware of the different systems and different configurations that are available is really going to help you along the way. And lastly, one thing that is very, very important in these larger buildings is the air tightness of your ducts. If you, this is often something that's value engineered out because aero sealing is quite an endeavor, but it really, really, really helps the efficiencies of these systems. I've had a couple of projects where duct sealing has been value engineered out, and now we're having issues with leakage in the ductwork, and where everything's filled up, they're covered up, it's hard to find those leaks. So doing something like this or specifying this on your projects is really, really, really important for these large projects. The typical and conventional means of connecting ductwork and sealing ductwork is not going to give you the air tightness you need in these systems to ensure the efficiency of the ERV. So making sure that you factored this in and you specified duct sealing and even pressure testing of the system and the duct network is really going to help you with that commissioning at the end and really kind of save you a lot of hurdles and a lot of pressure once the building's occupied and you're still dealing with issues. So this is a huge, huge part of the ventilation system is the air tightness of the ducts. And it's always an issue that gets run into in a lot of projects. So making sure you can kind of get ahead of the game with this is really going to help you. And now I'm going to quickly touch on some lighting controls and some electricity inputs. Lighting is one of the areas in these multifamily buildings that you often may not think is going to be as much of a load as it is. But when we're looking at passive house projects and residential buildings, we have to kind of factor in a lot of the areas that are outside of suites. So for example, the PHPP is going to take what is inside the suite, and we can assign a lighting ratio for that. But when we look at how the lighting control strategy works, like outside of those suites, we have to account for all that lighting. So if you've got a corridor that's lit 24/7 and you've got some really, really poor halogen or incandescent bulbs lighting that space, that's a huge energy sink over the course of your year. So what we like to do for our projects is look to see what options we have available for both the light fixtures on an LED standpoint, and then also look at lighting control strategies. If there's a way that we can reduce the lighting load in a 24/7 corridor, we're going to try to find that, because that's really going to help us for our energy at the end of the game. So in the PHPP, this is the electrical worksheet near the end in the green sheets, and the lighting control input here. So what this kind of alludes to is how you're going to control your lighting. Is it going to be manual, automatic? Is it going to be by a bus system? And when I first started looking at the PHPP a few years ago, I was like, well, these, what does this even mean? So I did a bit of due diligence and kind of figured out and put it into more layman's terms. So if you're manual, it's a switch on the wall, like we have in our houses. It's user control. If you're always on, or these two settings here, they're more referring to daylighting. So you can have systems that offset or dim when there's sufficient daylighting available, which also really reduces our lighting load. And then the fourth option is by bus system. So this would be BAS, or a lighting controls strategy. You've got no user interaction, and it's fully automatic. So depending on which one of these systems best align with your lighting control strategy, it can really help reduce the energy consumption you've got just from the lighting. And when we're in these multifamily buildings, every single area outside the suites, we have to account this for. So it does add up over time and over the course of the building. And here's, you can kind of see with some corridor lighting here. So typically it's a 24/7 requirement by code to have this space illuminated. Here are some typical inputs from PHPP. And when we do our own lighting power density calculations from our lighting design, we can often lower these inputs. You can have more efficient lighting, you can have different control strategies, and it can really increase your efficiency and decrease your consumption. So working with your electrical engineer that you've got on the project to ensure that your lighting selection, or even with your architect, your interior designer, whoever's doing your lighting selection, it doesn't always have to be the engineers, making sure that you're getting the most efficient. Because not all pot lights are going to give you, not all LED pot lights are going to be a low wattage. You might have to do a bit more due diligence to kind of get there and find out what product will work best for your project. Apologies, this should have been up here with not all LEDs are created equal. So you can see here, this is project 1 and project 2, just a bit of a snip from the lighting schedule for these projects. We've got one LED pot light that is, they're all the same, like, 5-6 inches diameter. One is 30 watts. Project 2, a 5-inch, is 5 watts. So if you're looking at, you've got 10 or 15 of these in a corridor and they're lit 24/7, 365, which one would you rather from an energy perspective, the 5 watt or the 30 watt? So making sure that you look at a bit more closely what these components are and what their electrical draw is. And a bit more on some of the other equipment in a multifamily project that you might not consider, having worked with single family homes, for example. Elevators, you need to consider the electrical consumption from elevators. And pumps. When you get into these larger projects, 5, 10, 15 stories, it becomes a game of consumption. Pumps are always going to be more than you think. And getting information on the pumps from your mechanical engineer or what have you, and understanding how they're going to be working and when they're going to be working is going to be really important to see, maybe there's another option or an optimization that can be employed if it becomes a bit of a situation with the energy results. And lastly, we talked about this a little bit on the last slide. all of the areas outside of suites, you have to account the energy for. So these are inputs that are often, maybe not considered or not really fully understood when it comes to these multifamily projects that really do create a bit of an energy sink in these buildings that we have to look for ways to optimize and improve to make sure that we can meet our energy targets and ultimately provide a building that is high performance, both with the envelope and with the building systems. And an example on pump energy. So it's more than you think. So here's a pump schedule from a project, just a sample schedule. And what we have to do is count, how much energy do these motors take? How long are they going to be working? Some of them, they may be running all the time. Some of them, they may be only running when there's a storm or, if they're testing the fire alarm system. So not all of them are going to be working at the same time, but a lot of them are going to be working throughout the course of the year. And that energy does add up. And it ends up being a lot more than you think it would if you're coming from experience with single family homes or low rise development. So yeah, in larger buildings, it becomes a bit of a game of knobs and levers where we're looking to reduce our energy consumption. And typically that would come from pumps or lighting or other electrical loads. Everything needs to be accounted for so that we can then look for ways to optimize these systems. And lifts or elevators, sorry. When we're looking at energy classifications, for elevators, we obviously want as best efficiency as we can get out of these systems, and understanding the classification systems and then also where we fall in the North American market for these is really impactful. We find from some monitoring data that the efficiency classes stated aren't always what is actually seen in reality. So making sure that as a Pacifist consultant and designer, you've got a bit of leeway with the specifications from the architect or whoever the conveying consultant is to ensure that you can try to find as best efficiency as you can with these systems. The standby power and the, depending on the frequency of use, can really add up over the course of a year. And it can really be impactful on your energy. So making sure that you do your due diligence and you specify something that works from a budget standpoint, but also from an energy standpoint for your project will really help you. So in summary, for multifamily buildings where we're looking for optimization, you need to look at all avenues for energy efficiency. It's not just with envelope and windows. It's a holistic approach to the whole building. We're going to look at domestic hot water, ventilation, electrical consumption, and also our envelope and our windows and our thermal bridges and everything like that. We want to stress the coordination with the design team to ensure that at every step of the way that the project is achieving the criteria we need for certification and identifying any areas of risk or that we may see needs to be improved upon or further optimized. And just to note that if you're tight on meeting your energy criteria, depending on the nature of your project, you may be able to use the PER relaxation tool. This helps for residential buildings with high occupant density. So it could be an avenue that you could look into if you are tough or tight on meeting these requirements. You typically have to reach out to a Pacifist certifier to get this tool. It's not something you can download from Pacipedia or anything like that. And a little bit of touch on specifications here because they are very, very important in these large projects. Project specs are what govern the hierarchy of what you can get on site. People think that the drawings are it, but really it's the project specifications. These need to be clearly aligned with the requirements for Pacifist, and everybody on the project needs to understand what the outcome is. So you can easily write into these project specifications, training requirements, mock-up requirements, air tightness, everything like that. Specs are very, very important in the construction world, but it's one of the areas of the industry that I think needs a lot of work and a lot more coordination. And it's very, very important to me, and it should be important to other Pacifist consultants because it's where we're going to make the best impact on these projects if we can document it in the project specifications. It's just a little pick. That's something that's very important to me. Having written a few project specifications, it's something that's very important, and everybody should be doing the coordination on these projects to ensure that everything's aligned. So that's it for me for today. Yep. That's me. I'm a senior Pacifist consultant with Peel Pacifist Consulting. So I will stop sharing my screen and get my camera back. So I guess we'll open it up for questions. Is that right, Lori?
Yeah, and so there's one in the chat. Matt, do you want to come in and ask your question rather than me reading it?
Let me unmute. Yeah, so in the barrage of information these days, I lose track of where I heard things. But on a recent Passive House webinar, somebody told me that a newish requirement in the Ontario code necessitated more fire dampers than there used to be, and it was pushing MERBs back to using distributed HRVs rather than any kind of centralized HRV or ERV system. And I'm wondering, is that true? And is that something we're going to start to see elsewhere?
So I have heard that as well. It hasn't been an issue with any of the projects that I've worked on that's pushed them to in-suite ERVs. Typically, I mean, like fire dampers and smoke dampers are pretty important on these designs when we're looking at centralized ERVs. So it could have been a team or something that may have missed that requirement, which often happens.
Okay. And they're not horribly expensive either.
No, they're not. They're not expensive.
Yeah.
And if you catch it, if your mechanical engineer knows what they're doing, they should be able to catch that early enough on in design. And there are different strategies that can be employed to, in theory, reduce the number of fire dampers. I worked with some engineers who have some pretty unique kind of creative solutions for these types of situations that really can kind of work in your favor when you're looking at saving some costs on these fire and smoke dampers.
Thank you.
So Kelly, I wrote down like 17 questions, but I'm not going to hog them. But I am curious if you are able to give a sense of like, what is the sort of smart cutoff between a centralized and a decentralized system, knowing that there's going to be like, you know, some cases where it's a bit fuzzy, but like, are you like, yeah, it's 20 units, so I'm definitely going to do centralized, or is it, you know, more sophisticated than that?
So I think it varies really project to project. I've seen some projects where they have in suite and, you know, it's like a 6-story building, or I've seen 10-story buildings that have centralized systems. So it really depends. One of the contributing factors that I've noticed is site availability for these trades to do big centralized systems. So in areas where there might not be a whole lot of trade knowledge or contractors that are capable of doing that, then you may go towards a more conventional residential style where you've got individual in-suite ERVs. It really just depends on what works best for your project and what your mechanical engineer is proposing. There's really, I mean, the downside to in-suite ERVs I find personally is the risk of air tightness. You're going to have 2 more holes through your envelope for every single suite that you've got. And if you're really working with you know, fresh builders who may not understand a lot of the passive house requirements for air tightness, you're just opening up a whole other gambit of issues that you may not want to contend with when it comes to air tightness. So like if you got a 50 unit building, that's 100 more holes through your envelope as opposed to only 2 from a centralized system. So it's just looking at things like that, and efficiencies or even space within the suites is often a premium. In a lot of affordable housing, there's not a whole lot of square footage to work with. So where are you going to put that system? Is it going to go in a closet? If it's an in-suite ERV, like there's a lot of different things to consider. So it's not really like a cutoff line per se. It's going to work on a project to project basis. And each system will have its own kind of pros and cons depending on the nature of the project.
Thanks.
No problem.
Does anybody want to jump in and ask some questions?
I can maybe comment here, so it's Aaron, on the smoke dampers thing. I think whenever the Nova Scotia adopted the 2015 National Building Code a few years ago, yeah, it did introduce the requirement for smoke dampers with our ducts that enter into an apartment. So we changed a lot of our designs over to individual ERVs because I think their cost comes in at, rather than a fire damper might only cost $200 each, but a smoke damper is more like $1,500 each. So whenever you put in like 2 smoke dampers, like one for the supply and one for the exhaust for each apartment, you're into like $3,000 per apartment for doing the individual type. If you want to have an if you want to do a central ERV, then there's a significant cost there. So it can come down to a lot of cost savings if you do an individual compartmentalized, unit with an ERV in each apartment, unless, if you're maybe into a passive house kind of certified ERV, maybe the individual one may come up in cost. There's can be quite expensive. Maybe it's $3,000 per apartment in a passive house apartment, but in a standard apartment that we're maybe looking at, it's maybe like $800 or $900 for an ERV. So there's a lot of cost savings to just doing individual ERVs and kind of standard designs anyway.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep, thanks.
You have a rebuttal, Kelly?
Nope. I agree with the sentiment, and I will be the first to admit that some of these items I'm not too well versed on the individual cost per component. I'm looking at it more of like a holistic cost for a whole building. So that's where my costing experience comes from, is when you look at it from holistically for a system and not an individual component. But I know it is a problem that has been faced. But my projects, we've kind of found a way around it, whether it's creative design for mechanical engineer, or it was included in the costing estimates as we went through the project.
Cool.
Lisette has put a all right, now I'm the one with getting tongue-tied, specification checklist into the chat. And it's probably a good time to bring it up that we're talking to Passive House designer in Alberta, Kim Walton, about coming and talking to us about specifications next month. But I actually will probably ask you for some support on that, Kelly, because you have expertise as well.
Yeah, it's a good game, specifications for Passive House. So there's a lot to consider and a lot to include to ensure you've got the proper delivery of the project. So yeah, definitely, it's one of my keen interests, I find, just because I'm a very organized individual. So project specifications offer that avenue to just really break down the project in a bunch of text and requirements and very organized structure. So I love specs. Not everybody does, but yeah, it's always a great conversation.
Excuse me. This is Jacqueline Williams speaking, and thank you so much for your presentation. Hi. Really appreciate it coming on. I also love specifications, and I'm kind of curious as to when you really do get involved, more so on the Passive House side. It's always the earliest is better, I'd like to say, but where do you usually find your projects where you come in?
So on our consulting projects, we get brought in typically very early in the project. And one of the things that I find myself nagging architects for is their preliminary specs. From a Passive House standpoint, we need to include a bunch of stuff in Division 1 to ensure the proper delivery. Obviously speaking master format here. And then there's a bunch of other things, in Division 7, Division 8, your windows, your doors, your sealants, your insulation, all of those things we need to make sure align with the requirements for the project. So before anything goes to tender, ideally, we need to have a look at it to make sure that everything's aligned properly and it's all going to go well for certification, and that whoever's on site building knows exactly what they have to do for mock-ups, for air tightness testing and strategies, all of these things. So yeah, as early as you can, but definitely before anything goes to tender.
Thank you.
And Paula Hamilton is asking if you could expand on what needs to be added in Division 1.
Oh, hi, Paula. It's fancy seeing you here. I think we're working on a project together, so. Yeah, so in Division 1, what we typically write into the specs is we do a little bit at the beginning. I can't remember what spec section number it is, but it's mostly, we typically take over like sustainability requirements and we turn it into a Passive House section. And in there, we're detailing rather well what needs to happen for air tightness testing, what needs to happen for mock-ups, what needs to happen for training on site, and who's going to receive that training. So we can write all of those requirements into Division 1 so that it governs the rest of the project. So whoever, if it's a GC or a CM or whatever the nature of your contract is, there's a clear requirement for how they have to train and who they have to train, and the documentation that needs to be provided for that. In addition to that, we get into a little bit of commissioning and photographic documentation to ensure that as the building is being constructed, you're getting all your documentation that you need from whoever is being assigned that role as you go through construction. It becomes a bit harder to get those pictures once everything's covered up. So we want to make sure that it's very clear who that role is and the nature and quality of those photos that we need.
Kelly, thanks for that comprehensive response. So I am working on another project besides the one that we're both involved in. And so I would like to ask that's a lot of very detailed information, incredibly important information that needs to be included in Division 1. What's the best source for getting that? For example, the spec writer we usually work with does not have Pacifist experience, and so would probably just throw up his hands, And I'm not at the stage, not really equipped yet to, draft something, from first principles. So how would one go about that?
That is a very good question, and one that I often get. I got mine through trial and error on a few projects, reviewing it and making sure that everything worked out well, and then just throwing my hands up in the air and saying, this isn't right, and this is how it needs to be. It's something that I know Pacifist Canada has dabbled with before in the past. I'm not sure what's come of that, but there was talk of getting a standardized specification to help the industry. Aside from that, there are some spec writers out there who do specialize in passive house, or not necessarily passive house, but sustainability as a whole. So there is a lot of commonalities between different standards with respect to air tightness testing and documentation on site. So those types of things can really help inform them for writing specifications to passive house. When it comes to getting a template or a sample, I honestly don't know what would be available in the public world. A lot of the projects I work on are private, so it's not something that I can share.
This sounds like something Construction Specifications Canada maybe needs to jump in on.
Definitely, yes, definitely.
Thank you.
They need to jump in and help a bit to get the industry up to speed.
Great questions.
Kelly, when you were talking about the quality of the pipe supports, were you just talking about the physical pipe supports, or the actual detail around the installation of the pipe supports?
The installation continuity around the pipe supports. Yeah, so oftentimes people think they can just insulate over top of the pipe support, but really you need to insulate inside the pipe support.
Right, and then
I don't know why that's such a hard concept to understand, but it's often the case where it's like the insulation is never on the right side of the support. So it's just something to really harp on to your trades.
Sometimes it's just timing of the insulators and when mechanicals come through and they're not waiting for insulators.
Yeah, but I mean, have a bit of patience. I know sometimes timelines don't lead to that, but if you're hanging the pipe, just have the fittings when you're hanging the pipe. That's it. And it's not that much of a sequencing battle. It shouldn't be anyway.
I may as well ask all my questions. Oh, I have the last question here, but
go ahead.
Go for it.
I'm interested to hear Lori's questions too. But
it's okay.
For the time to tap, are you also looking at applying a manifold system for, as opposed to a trunk and branch, and with just smaller piping kind of thing?
Well, yeah. So it would really depend on how your client wants to operate the building. Sometimes Some of the projects I've worked on, they don't care. They don't care, like, if it comes into the suite and gets distributed, that's fine. Some people want to have meters or regulations on and be able to shut off individual fixtures. So it really depends on the approach from the client side and how they're operating their building. But definitely a main distribution system that feeds into manifolds in each suite. And then from there, you're branching out for your distribution in individual pipelines to your fixtures.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Valentine.
Yeah. You lay on your questions, Lori.
Yeah, well, I'm just like, does anybody else want some? I mean, what I'm curious about, I guess, so we've got some great mechanical engineers and contractors on this call. And something that's sort of been on my mind, especially for multi-unit projects, is just, you know, in our region, there are a lot of the contractors and you know, and even the professionals are still, it's really new to them. So I guess I'm kind of like, what are your tips, or what are like the top, you know, coordination mistakes that happen between like design teams and their consultants? Because like, I think, you know, when everybody's just learning it, like, you know, I'm just as likely to make a coordination mistake as my consultant and not kind of getting the information through at the right time. So yeah, I'm really curious about that and what you see happening.
So one of the ways that I like to manage the coordination is setting a bunch of milestones per project phase. So from experience on my past projects with consulting, what we generally understand is as you go through each phase, whether it's schematic design, design development, or even construction documentation, like every single one of those phases, we're going to reach different milestones in all parts of design, whether that's architectural, mechanical, structural, what have you. And we've generally have worked to understand what milestones align with Passive House for that. So per phase, we know, if we're in design development, we should have an understanding of what are the fundamentals and the schematics for our domestic hot water distribution, for example. And we should be able to say, okay, if we run it this way or this way, we have, these types of things. So understanding from a Passive House standpoint, when those design decisions need to be made per phase can really help you kind of set up an organization or a tracker to say, okay, we're in schematic design. We need to ask the ME for this, or we need to ask structural, what are we doing here? And that really kind of helps and aids the coordination as you go through. That documentation and workflow and tracker has come with a lot of experience and a lot of practice on projects. And obviously mistakes were made to help us learn. I mean, that's how we learn, is we try something and we keep going and we get it right eventually. So it's all about that process. And making sure that you're fundamentally aware as a designer when things need to be done for your building, and reaching out and oftentimes forcing that coordination to happen when you want it to happen and not when the consultants want it to happen. So you have to own a lot of these coordination items as a Passive House consultant and designer, and say, look, we want you to look at ventilation flow rates right now. This is what we've got. This is going to help us understand, what we need for insulation on our walls. It's going to drive our space heating demand. We need to sort this out right now. And you have to own that as a Passive House consultant. You can't rely on your ME to say, oh, this is my first Passive House project. I'm going to get to that later. We don't need it right now. But, you have to say, yes, we need it right now. You have to give this to me. So it's being aware of the process and owning some of that aspects that maybe you didn't own before as an architect or as a designer. So making sure and having that awareness of when things need to be included. And you can pull a lot from single family home development as well to say, when you would make those decisions, and kind of align that with when you would make it in a multifamily.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Actually, that's definitely happened to me, where I've been like, I need to kind of make sure that what I'm doing in the PHPP in terms of ventilation rates aligns with what the mechanical contractor was going to do. And they're like, well, we're not going to do that for months yet. And it's like,
oh no, you have to tell them. It's like, I need this now. Like, so, get off your whatever. Like, just do this. So
yeah, and I mean, I was also maybe not asking the right way. Also, like I'd be like, okay, like sort of wondering when I would get it, but I would ask it the wrong way, and then finally they were like, oh, you need that now.
Yeah. And one thing, like, One thing that I find really helps is something that we do at Peel when we start these projects is we have a bit of a kickoff. We say, this is what the expectations are for Passive House. This is what we're all working towards. And I find once everybody understands like the fundamentals and the principles, they're a lot more on board for the success of the project. They feel like they have their own say. You get that awareness, that buy-in, and that cooperative nature a bit more, rather than saying, no, we need this now, give it to me. You build them up, and you get that, you instill the foundational knowledge and the confidence, and then I think that you can work a little bit more from there.
Yeah, so the project I'm talking about, one engineer was assigned to the project in like the proposal phase, and then a guy who hadn't even ever heard the words Passive House before actually got assigned to it when the work was actually happening. So he was, it was really challenging. And I think that I'm telling you guys this because it was like super frustrating, and that it probably is going to keep happening for a long time, because there's lots of, lots of growth that needs to happen in this. So Erin has a question in the chat.
I see that, yeah. Did you want to read it out, or should I?
Yeah, so do you see any projects using domestic water heaters in apartments rather than centrally located to reduce the circulation piping?
No. I think that the efficiencies with some of these centrally located systems can really, really help. When you're moving towards individual water heaters per apartment, those are generally going to be electric or natural gas. And when we're looking at finding efficiencies in our domestic hot water system, there's a lot of other kind of equipment and options we can use. For example, the sand and CO2 heat pumps. They can provide domestic hot water, and whether it's a single family home or a 10-story building, they work. You gang them together, you set them up, and the coefficient of performance is much more improved than that of a direct electric heater. So there's a lot of different options you can use to get more efficiency out of your equipment, rather than pigeonholing yourself into, smaller tanks that are electric that, you've got a 1-for-1 COP on. And a lot more maintenance too, mind you. When we got, 50 units or 100 units, if you've got 100 individual hot water heaters, that's a lot of maintenance that you're going to have to contend with, as opposed to one centrally located plant and piping. And I see Brad Matheson's got a confirmation to Aaron Smith's costing. You had a South Shore project with 30 units and individual ERVs at 30 or 3K per unit. You could have gotten a centralized ERV for that or less when you're looking at the Passive certified units that go at that range. So maybe something to consider as well, for especially when it comes to maintenance and replacing the filters. Because then you have to replace the filters in those, every 6 months in every single suite. So it adds up over time.
Brad, is that the Treehouse project? Is he still here also? I don't see his name anymore.
No, he must have left. Maybe we didn't get to his statement.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it was like, if the building type didn't lend itself to it for some reason.
Oh yeah, it may have, which is often the case, and that's fine.
Yeah. I'm curious, Kelly, have you done many projects with, or any projects with the kind of combo units, like the serve, that's the combination heat pump ERV? And there's also the Minotaur, which I think is like the junkier version of the serve.
Yeah, so I don't think that those are certified.
Yeah, so I just like diss them publicly, but sorry.
So you're speaking to the combination, so ERV mixed with heating and cooling, correct?
Yeah, like so, it's not like the European ones that also have hot water, but it's ventilation.
Oh yeah, no, those are we don't even have those
here. Into a ventilation unit.
Yeah, so I don't think that those are actually certified units with PHI. I think that they just
Okay,
have
yeah,
straight up ERVs. So typically the units that I work with are
of course,
the larger, more than 600 meter cube for the larger projects.
right.
Yeah, like Swigon Gold.
Yeah, or Ventacity have some really
Yeah.
great units
Right.
as well for multifamily homes. And Ventacity is out of the States too, so a bit more local for servicing and parts, which is
Yeah.
kind of nice.
Barry was on this call.
I saw his name. I wonder where he
Yeah.
went.
Yeah.
He must have left as well.
And there's a new one, Oxygen 8, Oxygen with a number
Yep.
8.ca. They make HRVs and ERVs that integrate with heat pumps to do it all.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's a lot of new tech coming, which is really great. It'll make it a lot easier to kind of do that. And that's not to say that you couldn't, like I've done some analysis for supplier heating and supplier cooling in these larger projects. So that's where we are, we have a central heat pump to do heating and cooling, and that heats and cools the areas out of the supply stream from the ERV. So there are like essentially like ways that you can get it to work the same fashion as those systems that are all combination. It's just a bit more external parts.
I got another question, Kelly.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you were talking about the pumps, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because yeah, you wouldn't deal with that with residential. So like you're looking at like the diversity, because you mentioned like obviously you're not all pumps are running all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So like if you're trying to meet your 15 kilowatt hour per meter squared, like do you have to calculate? Are you just assuming the pumps are running all the time for that 15 kilowatt?
Oh, no. So
Right.
so the pump energy is going to affect your primary energy, not so much your heating.
Right.
So it'll be your 60 kilowatt or your 120, depending on your certification. Yeah. So what we do is we build out a time of use for these pumps, and in spreadsheets, because that's our life. So yeah, we get that information from our engineers of expected time of use, and we build out that with the motor rating for these systems. So it's all based off that time of use and expected duration. So it's not 24/7 for everything. It's the higher end to be more conservative, just to make sure that we're covering all our bases.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
I was going to ask you about the primary energy relaxation tool. So is that just, would that just be for like multi-family projects, or
it's only for residential projects?
Okay.
And it's a mechanism to help with these densely occupied buildings, because when we get into affordable housing or social housing, we all know that they're trying to get as many suites as they can into these buildings. So these suites are going to be as small as humanly possible, as small as code will permit. And when we're looking at that, we get a lot more people in a lot smaller space than what they may be typically used to seeing in Europe, where the PHP was kind of built around. So this tool is a mechanism, if you've got those high density occupancy, to kind of help spread that out a bit. So it takes the area of either your residential portion or the non-residential portion, and it builds out a new factor to say, this is your new maximum threshold. So for some projects, you may go from 120 to 135, or like if you're looking at a PE metric, and if you're PER, you could go from 60 to 70. It just depends on the nature of the project. But it does it on a project by project basis. It assesses the climate and the areas allocated to suites. So if you're working with a certifier and you're tight on your energy, just reach out. They may be able to share that tool with you to see what your new metrics would be.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that was an option. Not that we're always, working on super dense buildings, but
yeah, but you may end up with a building at one point where you're just like, there's nothing you can do to get lower than that mark. And this is a tool that can really help you and just kind of alleviate some of that stress as you're going through design.
Yeah, very cool. I'm like scanning the faces at the top to see if anybody has any questions for you. I think mine might all have been answered at this point. So I didn't quite have 17. I think I don't know. I don't have a sense of the range of experience of the people joining us. I mean, I think we definitely have some people who are actively working on passive house projects and energy modeling, and some who are just starting. So I was just thinking maybe I would ask you to explain PE and PER, because
yes,
PER confuses everybody, and also, some of you may not even know what the heck we're talking about. So
okay, yeah. So PE and PER stand for primary energy and primary energy renewable. So when we're looking at passive house projects for certification, there's a maximum threshold for energy that you can consume, which is shown as a kilowatt hour per meter square per year. And what this kind of looks like is, it adds up how much energy you're using for heating, cooling, domestic hot water, and electricity. And it applies a distribution factor to that and says, here's what you've got for a metric in the P2P. So this, when you're looking at primary energy renewable, this is an indicator that you would perhaps have renewable energy on your building. And so, for example, if you've got solar panels to get solar PV, you can use that as an offset mechanism against your consumption up to a certain amount. So for PER, primary energy renewable, the maximum threshold you've got for energy consumption is 60 kilowatt hours per meter square per year. And when, for example, if you go over that, so say you're at 65, but you've got solar panels on your site or on your building or on your roof, what those solar panels produce, you have a certain amount of that can be offset from your PER threshold. So if you're over by 5 kilowatt hours, oftentimes your PV installation can supplement that, and then you can still achieve certification. When we're looking at primary energy, this is a metric to use generally when you're not using renewable energy. So if you've got natural gas in your project, for example, which is pretty big in Ontario, maybe not so much here out east, there's very limited infrastructure for that, I've noticed. Or if you're using oil to heat your hot water or your space heating, that is going to be rated at a different factor for distribution and losses. So we've grouped that under primary energy. And under primary energy, we've got 100 kilowatt hours per meter square per year. The caveat, though, is if you're using PE for your project and you still have solar panels as a renewable energy, whatever, you can't use any reduction. The PHPP, as soon as you toggle on that PE target, you can't use the offset of your energy or renewable energy on site. So it's a bit of a weird system, but essentially it's I say weird because there's a little bit of a gray area somewhere in there. But it's two different energy metrics that you can assign for your building based off of whether you've got renewable energy or whether you're using non-renewable energy, for example.
Thank you.
And there's a lot more nitty-gritty to it, but generally speaking, that skims the surface.
So Nicola in the chat is asking, how do you factor PER when you're considering installing solar panels potentially 2 to 3 years after the construction of the building? So maybe you're going to phase the renewables later.
Unmute myself. Is this, would you be seeking certification in 3 years or so after, or would you have certified already without the solar panels?
Well, I'm presuming that Nicola is my client. I'm like, certification will still be happening based on what I know about the process of certification these days. But that was very cynical. Well, it's both a budgetary thing and also to get a sense of, okay, is this building performing as modeled? Do we need to spend as much on solar panels as anticipated? So, would you just declare your intent to put solar panels on the building, but not do them yet, and then prove it later? Like, are there ways around that?
I'm not entirely sure on that one. Usually, I'm a check all the boxes kind of kid. So, yeah. I'm not really sure on that approach. Typically, maybe do it all at once. I don't know. I can't speak to it.
Just to add, there is a weird thing in New Brunswick. We are is that we don't have any incentives for solar panel at the get-go of the project. So when you start, there is 0. But after 2-3 years, you can get an incentive for NB power, which doesn't make any sense. on the commercial. So that's why sometimes a lot of the projects say we don't start, we wait, and after you are installing solar panels so that you can get an incentives. So that's why I say, how do you factor that in?
Yeah, no, that's a weird system. I guess it's New Brunswick.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it would be an issue though. Like, is your project having issues with PER at the moment, or is it just something that you're going to be doing in the future?
No, there's not issues at this point.
Okay, then
I mean, we're just it's schematic at this
It's going to
point,
help you in the future.
But it will help.
Yeah, but if you don't need them for certification at this point, then you can certify without them. I would hazard a guess.
Right. Good point. Paula has her hand up.
I see that.
Kelly, this isn't directly related to what you've talked about, but if you could answer briefly, it would be appreciated. I'm working on another project where the consultant's suggesting that we use FIAS for certification rather than Passive House. And the only parameter they gave was that FIAS, it's easier to achieve certification A, and B, they provide that certification sooner. In any event, how does one, I have absolutely no knowledge of how FIAS differs. How does one kind of get up to speed a little bit on how it works?
Yeah, so I'm an advocate for Passive House International. So like PHI. FIAS, I have very limited understanding of, just because it's not something that I've worked with extensively. I know, Lori, you've done a bit of work with FIAS, have you not?
Yeah, but not recently. And what I would say about FIAS, they change the standard like every couple of years.
Yeah.
So like it's kind of like, I definitely am not well enough informed to speak to it at this point, but essentially they kind of do a bunch of math and scratch their heads and change a number of their targets every year, or not every year, but every like 2 to 3 years. And so the basis of the changes is, you know, that they are they're working to do what they're calling the climate adjusted standard. And so the targets are not like if you're somewhere in a, you know, a kind of more milder climate zone, then the targets are different for you than if you're in very northern locations. And this is, you know, their theory is that economically this will be easier to achieve passive house projects. So that's why they're changing the targets. But I'm no authority on what their targets are anymore, because you know, it's been probably 5 years since I looked at the metrics for our area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often get that question. You know, what is the difference between FIAS and PHI? My general answer is PHI is rigorous, a lot more so, and you know, you're not going to have a lot of that performance gap. That's not to say that FIAS does. It's just it's more recognized internationally, and it's the standard that Passive House Canada is aligned with as well. So.
Kelly, do you know when PER is going to be, like, is there a year that, this is Valentine's question, that PE will be phased out and PER will be the only option?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I didn't expect anyone to have the exact answer.
So yeah, and oftentimes like the timelines that PHI will set for itself too with these fundamental changes to standards can take a long time to roll out as well. I mean, for example, we've been waiting for PHPP 10. I've heard it's been coming for 2 years now. German. If you know German, you can use it. It's supposed to be coming in English later in the year, which is really, really great to hear. But these types of changes, they like to do all of the research and have all of the foundational documentation to support it. So I honestly can't say when it's going to come. I know soon, if that's close enough.
TBD.
Yes, exactly, TBD.
I have another, like a general comment. And Laurie, this may be another discussion topic for a discussion presentation that maybe Kelly, if you have experience in, or even Laurie, if you have experience in, regarding using the ERP worksheet for energy retrofits. Like, is there a way that we can get a walkthrough of that worksheet?
Sure. I've taken a couple courses on how to use that.
Really?
Yep. I went over to a conference in Germany a couple of years ago for PHI, and it was one of the courses that I sat. So it's fairly interesting to see it all kind of come together.
Right. Okay.
So
Because I was looking for where I could.
Yeah, no, there's not a whole lot out there for it. And it's one of those things that you kind of have to learn while you do, unfortunately, I think is generally the mandate. Not really the mandate, but generally how you get to it. But I think that there's lots of like webinars and stuff that are available now for people who have gone through the process with EnerFits. I think Pacifist Canada has had a couple like tower symposiums or something that addressed a couple EnerFit projects. If you're looking for more of the nitty gritty and the technical stuff, that might be something that we can touch on quickly on one of these kind of gatherings.
Maybe we could have like I don't know, like we don't want people to fall asleep, but we could have like like some kind of little mini episodes of PHP tutorials or something like, or you know, that kind of you know, deepen your expertise. I feel like that stuff is, I mean, so like I taught myself PHP and I have so many gaps. Like I don't anymore, but I had so many gaps that I only learned that were gaps when I started teaching for Pacifist Canada. So like, you know, unless you're actually faced with doing certain techniques in the spreadsheet, like if you're not encountering them on projects, like it really is valuable to just watch somebody do it, frankly. So I think that's a great idea, Valentine, like that we could think about. So yeah, and I mean, you were right on time because I was just about to say, like, as we're winding down, like we've just got about 5 minutes left. If anybody has any burning topics that they want to learn about, we are reaching out to colleagues and experts in our networks to come and talk to us over the next little while. So happy to take notes.
You quickly mentioned that there's some things in German that aren't translated to English.
You speak German.
I do. I don't speak like to the end where I could translate it myself, because it is like, because in German they combine simple words and make one big word meaning to like summarize it. So I personally, I don't think I could translate today. But is that sort of like, I guess, a goal of mine I could do? And then my other question is also part of it because I am completely new to Passive House. And I just graduated last year of the AET program. Should I wait a couple of years to get sort of my general skills of the industry before taking a course with Passive House Canada? Or should I do it like in the next year while I'm learning at the same time in the industry?
Yeah, I don't think you need to wait if you're interested. You know, you'll just have to unlearn habits that are brand new. So, you know, learning sooner makes more sense to me. And I think, you know, it also in terms of where you are in your career, like the demand for Passive House is going to go up really sharply over the next little while. And so you'd be doing yourself a big favor to, you know, to kind of get that expertise right away. that's me. I mean, others on the call may have different opinions,
I agree.
but good.
You know, I was debating whether or not to message privately to you and Matthew, but I thought I'd do a general question to everybody, because people are different in terms of when they learn and stuff like that. So
that's true, but I think that what you're going to get when you do the Pacifist training is like fundamentals of building science that will inform every project, even if you're not even working on a Pacifist project. Like, you can't not know the science once you know it. So okay. I think, yeah, it's valuable. And Valentine has said the same thing. He's saying you can apply Pacifist principles sooner. So
perfect.
Yeah. Does anybody have any last burning comments? If not, I think we're about to wind down. Yeah, Paula's saying, Chris, that it would be great if there was a bursary or scholarship for recent grads. Like, do we offer any discounts to like university students or young professionals to get subsidized training?
It depends. The symposiums we do, the conferences we do, there is a student rate, for example, that we do offer, and we do offer some free seating for Canadians who are First Nations.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
That was what I thought, but yeah, it's But the other thing is, Hannah, your employer could get it subsidized through Nova Scotia Workplace Innovation Grant, whatever that's called.
Laurie, if I can push in very quickly too.
Yeah.
We've been working very closely with members and member companies to find those Canadian job grant funds that flow from the federal government to the provinces. And we've been quite successful at doing that. So quite happy to let people know to give our chap a phone call. David Robinson is his name. He may be able to help you or your company get a good portion of the training funded through the Canadian Job Grant program. I can post that. I'll post his contact information in our chat before we leave.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'll talk to my boss later this week about it.
Yeah, Paula, that's a good point. There definitely, depending on what funding you're applying for, the way that it's perceived can be negative. So if they think it's that Pacifist is a brand, or that the PHPP is proprietary, it can be challenging. But I think we are making headway. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kelly, for all of your words of wisdom.
Anytime.
Yeah, no, that was
do
fabulous.
My best to answer the questions.
Yeah, no, it was great. And we'll be, okay, it looks like our next event will be on Wednesday, March 30th. It's good that you posted that, Gusha, because I was going to say the 23rd. And Chris has just posted that contact info for David Robinson, so you can grab that before you sign off if you want. Yeah. So thanks, everybody. And thanks again to SIGA, our sponsor, and thanks to all of you for showing up again. Very exciting.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kelly.